It started as a simple plan, a hiking trip in the serene forests of Montana. Just me and my younger sister, Mia, to reconnect after years of growing apart. The forest was a lush, green ocean that stretched as far as the eye could see, its tranquility promising an escape from the chaos of daily life. But the promise of peace was a cruel illusion. The first few hours of our trek were filled with laughter and lighthearted teasing, the kind that only siblings can share. Mia was always the adventurous one, darting ahead on the trail, her ponytail bouncing in rhythm with her steps. I lagged behind, snapping pictures of the forest canopy and the occasional deer that darted between the trees. Then the storm came. It was sudden and fierce, the kind of storm that makes you feel like the sky is tearing itself apart. Sheets of rain drenched us within moments, and the wind howled, making it nearly impossible to hear anything else. Mia shouted something I couldn't make out, her voice swallowed by the cacophony. We needed shelter, and fast. That's when we saw it, the cabin. It looked like it had been plucked straight from a ghost story. Nestled between ancient pines, its sagging roof and rotting wooden walls gave off an air of abandonment. But it was shelter, and we didn't have much choice. Mia knocked on the door, her fists thudding against the wood. To our surprise, it creaked open almost immediately, revealing a hunched figure. Come in, the man said, his voice rough like sandpaper. He introduced himself as Travis, his face obscured by a scraggly beard and a worn hat pulled low over his eyes. The cabin's interior was dimly lit by a small fire in the stone hearth. The air inside was warm but thick, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. We're caught in the storm, I explained, forcing a polite smile. Travis nodded, gesturing toward the fire. Warm yourselves up. No need to catch a chill. The walls were covered in carvings, grotesque, spiraling designs that seemed to pulse in the flickering firelight. Mia traced one with her fingers, her brow furrowing. Interesting, aren't they? Travis said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Something about him put me on edge, but Mia seemed unfazed, chatting with him as if they were old friends. Travis brought out a pot of stew, the aroma wafting through the room. It should have been comforting, but instead, it turned my stomach. Eat up, Travis urged, ladling the thick, dark broth into mismatched bowls. Mia hesitated, lifting her spoon to her lips before stopping abruptly. She leaned toward the pot, her expression twisting into horror. Elena, she whispered, her voice trembling. There are bones in there. Human bones? My heart slammed against my ribs. I glanced at Travis, who was watching us with a predatory gleam in his eyes. I was hoping you'd stay longer, he said, his voice now a low growl. But I suppose I'll have to make do with what I've got. Before we could react, he lunged, his body contorted, bones cracking and skin stretching as he transformed into something monstrous. His face elongated into a grotesque snout, and his eyes burned with an unnatural light. A Wendigo. I grabbed Mia's hand, pulling her toward the door. The storm was still raging, but the cabin felt far more dangerous. We burst outside, the icy rain stinging my skin, and sprinted into the forest. But the growls followed us. Branches clawed at my face as we ran, Mia's hand slipping from mine in the chaos. I turned, screaming her name, but the darkness swallowed her whole. Mia! I shouted, my voice breaking. A blood-curdling scream tore through the air, freezing me in my tracks. It was Mia's voice, filled with terror and pain, and then silence. I stumbled back toward the cabin, desperation clawing at my chest. The Wendigo was there, standing in the doorway, its grotesque silhouette illuminated by the firelight. Come back, it rasped, its voice a sick parody of Travis's. I grabbed a burning log from the hearth, ignoring the searing pain as it scorched my hand, and hurled it into the corner where kindling was stacked. Flames erupted, spreading quickly through the dry, rotting wood. The Wendigo let out an unearthly screech, thrashing as the fire consumed it. The heat was unbearable, and I stumbled out into the storm, collapsing onto the muddy ground. The fire roared behind me, the cabin engulfed in flames. I stared at the inferno, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the rain. Mia was gone. Her scream echoed in my mind, haunting me as I stumbled back through the forest. Somehow, I found my way back to the trailhead, though I couldn't remember how. Rescue teams searched the area for days, but they never found Mia or what was left of the cabin. Now, I sit here, writing this, hoping to make sense of what happened. But the truth is, I'll never forget the sound of her scream or the look in the Wendigos' eyes as it hunted us. I came to Montana to reconnect with my sister. I left alone, burdened with the knowledge that some places are better left forgotten, and some monsters are all too real. I've always believed the forest held secrets. As a wildlife photographer, I've spent years chasing them, my camera lens acting as a bridge between the known and the unknown. Black Spruce Forest, deep in northern Ontario, was my latest obsession. I had heard whispers about its elusive moose population, but it wasn't just the animals that intrigued me. It was the remoteness, the untamed wild. The air bit at my skin as I trudged through the snow, my heavy boots sinking into the pristine white. The tall black spruce trees stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. I found a clearing near a frozen creek and began setting up my camera, adjusting the lens to capture the perfect shot of the forest stillness. It was then that I saw it, a gaunt, antlered figure lingering at the edge of the trees. At first, I thought it was a deer, albeit a strange one. Its body was thin, almost skeletal, and its antlers were jagged and sharp, like they'd been carved out of bone. My pulse quickened as I raised my camera, but when I focused the lens, the figure was gone. Dismissed as a trick of the light, I shook off the unease and returned to my work. By the time dusk fell, I had set up camp near the creek. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of my footsteps as I collected firewood. That's when I noticed them, massive claw marks raking across the nearby trees. I froze, my breath clouding in the icy air. Moose didn't leave marks like that, nor did bears, at least not this far north in winter. Something primal stirred in me, a quiet voice of warning, but I ignored it. I was here to uncover the secrets of the forest, not run from them. That night, I lay in my tent, cocooned in my sleeping bag, staring at the fabric ceiling. The wind howled outside, rattling the branches above. As I drifted into sleep, I heard it, a whisper. "Emily," my name, carried on the wind. I shot upright, my heart pounding. The whisper came again, closer this time, like someone was right outside the tent. Holding my breath, I strained to listen. The silence was oppressive. Then, the shadow appeared. Through the thin fabric of my tent, I saw its outline, tall, impossibly tall, with antlers that scraped against the top of the tent. My body froze in fear as the figure leaned closer, its long, clawed hands pressing against the tent's surface. I could see its breath, a misty plume in the freezing air. I don't know where I found the strength, but I screamed, a raw, desperate sound. The shadow recoiled, disappearing into the darkness. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears as I fumbled for my flashlight, but by the time I unzipped the tent and shone the beam into the forest, there was nothing. The next morning, I debated leaving. My hands shook as I packed my gear, but as I loaded my camera, I hesitated. The figure, whatever it was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. The idea of leaving without capturing it felt like failure, and I'd never been one to quit. I set out again, venturing deeper into the forest. Around midday, I stumbled upon a man, a hunter, clad in worn plaid and carrying a rifle. He eyed me with suspicion, his weathered face etched with concern. "You shouldn't be here," he said bluntly. "I'm a photographer," I explained, though my voice wavered. "I'm documenting the wildlife." His expression darkened. "This forest isn't safe. There's a spirit here, the Wendigo. It preys on the greedy, the isolated. You're better off leaving." I laughed nervously, but his words clung to me like frost. I wanted to ask more, but he turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I told myself it was folklore, a story to keep people away. Yet, as dusk approached, the forest felt heavier, darker. The shadows stretched long and menacing, and the wind carried an unnatural chill. I set up camp again, determined to stay one more night. I needed proof, something tangible to justify the unease crawling under my skin. As darkness fell, I kept my camera ready, the lens trained on the clearing. I didn't have to wait long. The Wendigo emerged from the shadows, its skeletal frame moving with unnatural grace. Its antlers glinted in the moonlight, and its hollow eyes glowed faintly, like embers. My hands trembled as I snapped photo after photo, the shutter clicking loudly in the silence. Then it turned toward me. It moved faster than I thought possible, its claws slashing through the tent as I scrambled to escape. I ran blindly through the forest, the Wendigo's guttural growls echoing behind me. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but I didn't dare stop. Somehow, I made it back to the trailhead collapsing in the snow. The forest was silent again, but I knew it was still there, watching. Weeks later, back in my studio, I developed the film. The photos were sharp, clear, too clear. The Wendigo was in every frame, its hollow eyes staring directly into the lens. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt dread. The creature wasn't just in the forest anymore. It was in my mind, my dreams. Every shadow, every creak of my apartment felt like a reminder that I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. The Wendigo had marked me, and I knew, deep down, that it would come for me again.